The US and UN warn violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo could escalate into a regional conflict. Hundreds of people killed as Rwandan-backed M23 rebels seize another city just over a week after the US brokered a peace deal. So how dangerous is this situation? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. Ongoing violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo is in danger of becoming a wider regional conflict, according to the US and the United Nations. The stark warnings come after M23 fighters seized the city of Uvira in eastern DRC. Hundreds of people were killed, thousands were forced from their homes as the Rwandan-backed rebel group advanced. Just a week earlier, US President Donald Trump oversaw the signing of a peace deal between the Rwandan and Congolese presidents. Qatar has also been mediating a peace process between rebels and the DRC. The area is rich in natural resources, but also in competing forces seeking territorial control. So why the warnings now from the US and the UN that a bad situation could get even worse? How big is the risk of violence erupting into a regional conflict? And what would that mean? We'll explore those issues with our guests in just a moment, but first a report from Katia Lopez-Hodayan.
Returning home to a volatile situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are the scenes witnessed by some of the tens of thousands of people who fled when M23 fighters seized the eastern city of Uvira. Regional authorities say hundreds of people were killed in a matter of days.
I was at home when suddenly my house was hit by a bomb. I was carrying my child on my back. At first I thought I was the only one injured, but then I realized the child had been hit too and was killed instantly.
The violence puts the DRC at odds with its neighbor Rwanda, which is accused by the UN and US of backing the rebel group. The Rwandan government denies this, but says it faces a threat from ethnic Hutu fighters across the border. M23 fighters have captured most urban centers in North and South Kivu, areas rich in gold and critical minerals used to make electronics. The rebel group now controls Goma, Bukavu, and Uvira, a transport and logistical hub. It's located on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, a junction between Tanzania, Zambia, and Burundi. A humanitarian crisis is developing. Displaced families are sheltering in overcrowded camps in Burundi, and many don't know if they have homes to return to. The Congolese and Rwandan presidents signed a peace agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump earlier this month. The U.S. ambassador to the UN and the UN's peacekeeping chief both warn there's a risk fighting will spill over.
We are deeply concerned that the Rwandan military's continued presence in Congolese territory in support of M23, and we will use the tools at our disposal to hold to account spoilers to peace.
In recent days, the new offensive launched by the M23 in South Kivu has revived the threat of a regional flare-up with incalculable consequences.
The M23 isn't part of the accord signed in Washington. It's involved in a separate process mediated by Qatar and signed an agreement with the DRC government last month. But now the government is calling for stronger international pressure to stop the violence and prevent a deeper regional conflict. Katia Lopez-Hodayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Kambale Musavuli, an analyst at the Center for Research on the Congo, Kinshasa. And in Lille, France, is Richard Moncrieff, project director for the Great Lakes region at the International Crisis Group. We did have a guest to represent the Rwandan position, but he withdrew just before we came into the studio. Richard, let's start with you. Why does Rwanda continue to deny that it's backing the M23 rebels when both the US and the United Nations insist that it is?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's had this policy of denial, the Rwandan government, for 4 years, which is the length of time that this M23 insurgency have been present in eastern DRC, backed up by the Rwandan government. My suspicion is that the Rwandans don't want to say that they are supporting the M23 in eastern DR Congo because they, in the end, couldn't justify it. I don't think there is justification under the international law of self-defense. I don't think that the country of Rwanda is under a significant threat from eastern DRC, and therefore the Rwandans actually have no justification for what they're doing. And so what they've done instead is started to talk a couple of years ago about what they call defensive measures. They're not clear whether that actually means Rwandan troops in DRC or along the border. But in any case, that flies in the face of a huge amount of evidence that puts thousands of Rwandan troops in North and South Kivu. So I think in the end, the answer is that the Rwandans are aware that what they're doing is not justifiable either politically or indeed legally.
All right, so there's no justification. So what are Rwanda's true motives here? And what would credible proof that Rwanda is involved look like? And who should be responsible for establishing that?
Well, just to turn it around to talk about the proof first, the proof that Rwandan troops have been in the eastern DRC since 2021-22 is absolutely overwhelming. I've talked to numerous eyewitnesses. There is the UN panel of experts who are established to look at sanctions busting in eastern DRC, or who have produced an annual report that establishes Rwandan presence for the last 4 years. I would also underline that the very presence of Rwandan negotiators right up to the Rwandan president in Washington indicates that the Americans certainly believe that Rwandans are part of this war, because otherwise, why would they be negotiating? I mean, why would the Americans be mediating a negotiation between the Rwandans and the Congolese? There's other signs as well. Just as an example, the Congolese army has lost a number of drones, a number of armed drones recently, and it seems almost certain that a number of them have been taken out by anti-drone missiles. Well, the M23 don't have access to those missiles as far as we know, and it seems very likely that would be the Rwandan army. So the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. Now, on to the motivations. I think, broadly speaking, Rwanda seeks to establish a sphere of influence in North and South Kivu, which could have a lot of benefit for the country, a lot of economic benefit. You mentioned up top about minerals that are under the soil in eastern DRC, and I think that's a factor, although it's not the only one. And Rwanda wants to be able to control, it wants a proxy force in the M23 that gives it control in the administrative capitals of North and South Kivu provinces. There's a security argument. I think it's massively overblown by Kigali. Kigali claims that there are Hutu militia in eastern DRC. Now, there are, and that's true, but I think we should just be clear that before 2022, those militia were pushed back by cooperation between the Rwandan army, the United Nations, and the Congolese army. And I'd also underline that those Hutu militia, although present in some areas, are not present in all the areas that the Rwandan army has been fighting in. So I don't think that the security argument stacks up on its own as a set of reasoning for the Rwandan actions.
Kambale, what are the M23's motives in the region? It says that its advances are defensive and are aimed at protecting minority communities from Burundian forces. Where does Burundi come into all of this? But it's building a parallel state right now. Is this to do with defensive measures, tribal allegiances, or do you suspect that something else is at play here?
I mean, it's important whenever we're speaking about the M23 to not look at just the pure talking point, right? The M23 has this talking point where they speak about minority groups, they speak about the inadequacy of the Congolese government. Those talking points are overblown. right? And I'll explain why I say this. When the M23 took over large part of North Kivu, they went into a mine, the Rubaya mine, in the North Kivu province. Surprisingly, they were extracting minerals. Now, this is something that's been documented by the UN group of experts. This is also something that Global Witness has documented, how the minerals from that mine found its way through a Rwandan company and then ended up in Luxembourg at Traxys, a Luxembourg registered company. So when we see that, we ask ourselves, if the claim of protecting a minority group is true, what are they doing inside the mines, right? So we know that they will use narrative, but why are we where we are today? There was a process. There was a process led by the former Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta, and the president of the Congo, to bring all the rebel groups together to find a way forward. Then these talks were taking place in Nairobi. And during these talks, the M23 actually violated a ceasefire, right? There was a consensus from all rebel groups operating in the eastern part of the DRC to put down the guns and discuss a way forward. So when they actually violated the ceasefire, the Congolese government responded by stating that they should not be taking part of this peace negotiation because on the ground they are actually taking vast swaths of land and displacing population. And of course, we can fast forward to today, what has happened in Doha, and also what has happened in Washington, D.C. a week or so ago.
Yeah.
So when we see that...
I want to talk to you about that. Some would say that this most recent escalation was entirely predictable after those Washington talks that you talk about, the Washington Accords. What do you think specifically those agreements failed to address that made this latest violence, this renewed violence, almost inevitable?
The Washington Accord does not have an accountability mechanism to hold those who will violate the terms of this agreement accountable. That's very blunt, right? One, the fact that if anyone decides to violate the ceasefire, what leverage do they have to either hold Rwanda or DRC economy? It doesn't exist. But for the Congolese side, we believe that any peace accord signed today, tomorrow, or anytime in the future will not bring about peace if there is no clause of justice. Why am I saying that? The people who are committing the crimes today, commanders of the M23 and their allies in Kigali, particularly the Rwanda Defense Force soldiers who have been implicated by the UN group of experts, if they are not held accountable, they will continue to commit the same crimes. They've done so since the beginning of the war in the 90s, and up to present, they're doing the same. So the Congolese civil society has been, since the beginning of the war, I could even say since 2010, calling for the implementation of the recommendation of the UN mapping exercise report, which is the creation of a tribunal for Congo. On the US side, the US actually has a huge leverage. The US has a law in the books, Public Law 109456, written by then Senator Barack Obama, signed into law by President George Bush. This law that I just quoted in Section 105 states that the Secretary of State of the U.S. has the power to withhold aid to any nation destabilizing the Congo. We just heard at the UN Security Council, Mike Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, state that Paul Kagame has been instrumental in planning and orchestrating the war in DRC. So we don't have to wait for the UN Security Council to act. The U.S. can use its own law to enforce Section 105 of Public Law 109456 to bring about peace and stability in DRC.
Well, let's put that to Richard. Picking up on what Kambale was just saying then, that the U.S. has been unusually blunt, saying that Rwanda bears the responsibility for pushing the region toward war. I mean, how significant do you feel that language is? Is it going to change anything on the ground, or is it mostly rhetorical? How can the perpetrators of the violence be held accountable?
Well, firstly, on the American position, the Americans have actually been quite outspoken about the Rwandan actions for a number of years, going right back to the previous administration under Biden. And But I would also underline that the statements made at the UN by the United States Permanent Secretary to the UN in New York just recently were very hard-hitting. I think that's correct. And I think that there is a feeling in the American administration that Paul Kagame went to Washington on the 4th of December, signed an agreement in the presence of Trump, and has now effectively betrayed what he signed in Washington. So I think there's a degree of understandable anger amongst American administrators and politicians in that respect. However, I would underline that Rwanda was under pressure by the Americans in the beginning and middle of this year, when the Americans started to mediate this, to withdraw their troops. And effectively, the Rwandans refused. And I think that one has to understand in this whole affair is the determination of Rwanda to continue to do what they're doing and to continue to carve out a sphere of influence in DRC at a huge human cost, which we've just heard about in the video from Uvira town. Despite all the criticism that's coming their way. Now, could further pressure from the US or from other countries change their mind? Well, I think it could. I think we'd have to see and find what that pressure would be that would get Rwanda to pull back. I mean, Rwanda are very, very clever diplomats. They watch what Western countries do. If they feel there's a de facto green light, then they continue to take more land in Eastern DRC, but they have in the past reacted to strong pressure. So I think that pressure is a very important part of the equation.
Kambale, sanctions keep coming up as an option, especially from Washington. Do sanctions still have leverage or any impact in the Great Lakes region, or have the actors there just simply learned to absorb them? Would further sanctions help at all?
We know that it works in the context of Rwanda. I'm not a big fan of the unilateral sanction regime of the United States. But in the case of the Congo, when there is global pressure on Rwanda, it does work. The stopping of the M23 in 2013 took military pressure, also aggressive diplomacy. What do I mean by that? Scandinavian countries, the European Union, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the United States, they withheld aid to Rwanda. And Rwanda actually stopped its support of the M23, and militarily, of course, the M23 was defeated. So we've seen in the past when sanctions were imposed on Rwanda, they acted accordingly to de-escalate the violence. And I even remember at the time, President Barack Obama phoned Paul Kagame directly during that time and put out a readout on the White House website. So that it does work. What is bizarre is with the mounting evidence existing, and I think it's been already mentioned that the evidence is so overwhelming, from photographic and video evidence existing of Rwandan Defense Force soldiers on Congolese soil, yet European nations, the United States, and even the African Union, they are not able to hold Rwanda accountable by using the sanctions method as a way of pressure. We think that it will work. We also have to look at what we can do with the DRC government in putting also pressure on the DRC government to build a stronger military to be able to face any external force that may affect the Congo. But I do believe that a sanctions regime will help in curbing Rwanda's engagement in DRC.
Richard, would you agree with that? And from a conflict management perspective, just how dangerous a moment is this compared to previous crises in the eastern DRC? Are we closer now perhaps to a grave miscalculation between the states than at any time in the past?
Yeah, let me address that question first, which is very important. We are at a very, very critical phase, and I think more so than at any point since the end of the civil wars or regional wars, both regional and civil wars at the beginning of this century in the early 2000s. In particular, we're seeing mounting rhetoric fighting on the ground and a real possibility of escalation between the Rwandan and the Burundi government. As your reporter said, I believe the Burundians had their army in eastern DRC fighting on the side of Kinshasa against Rwandan troops. That could spill over into Burundian soil, and I believe it did to a small degree in the last few days. So that is really of enormous concern. I think also of concern is the future of DRC, frankly, which is, it's had a chunk of its land taken out. There's a good 5 to 10% of the electorate of the country now under M23 rule. There are elections due in 2028, which may seem a long way off, but I think that the path to those elections is becoming ever more complex and fraught with risk. So I think that we really are at an absolutely critical juncture. Let me just address the question of sanctions, and I do broadly agree with the other speaker. I think that the important thing to note is that it's no good just applying one small sanction, but continuing with a broadly positive relationship. And we must note that Rwanda has managed to create a whole series of relationships with Western governments. Just as an example, they've offered to take migrants, failed asylum seekers, or even not failed asylum seekers, simply asylum seekers from Western countries, and house them in Rwanda. And they've deployed peacekeepers in other countries who have a reputation for being fairly efficient. So what the government in Kigali has done, and I think quite deliberately, has created what you might call reverse leverage, in the sense that although Rwanda receives aid from Western countries have a lot of interest in keeping a good relationship with Rwanda. And I think that the Western countries need to rethink their relationship with this country, given the terrible levels of destruction that their actions have wrought in eastern DRC.
I'm sorry to cut you short there, Richard, but time is rapidly running out. I've got so many questions I still want to ask. Kambale, there is, of course, a deeply human dimension to all of this. Families straddling borders, people fleeing homes in fear of their lives, histories of exile, unresolved trauma. What is it going to take to fix this peacefully? Can it be fixed?
The conflict in the Congo, from the Congolese side, is very clear. It's a war of aggression by two of our neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda. We invaded the Congo twice, in 96 and 98. They continue to support proxy rebel militias. For peace to come into DRC, our neighbors have to be curtailed, Rwanda and Uganda, in stopping to interfere in Congolese politics, supporting rebel groups, and so on. And there are mechanisms that we just mentioned in terms of international pressure. On the Congolese side, the DRC government must actually have the political will to have a functioning military that will address the security challenges of the country, and also opening up the political space for Congolese to be able to choose their leaders and hold their leaders accountable. And at the international level, which is much more important because the international community supports nations and companies implicated in the conflict in the Congo. These nations in their countries, be it in the United States, be it in Europe, the European Union, they should look at every mechanism in the books to bring about peace and stability. Why? An unstable Congo is dangerous not just for the region, but for the entire African continent. After 29 years of conflict, I think it is time now to implement the recommendation of the UN mapping exercise report.
Okay, all right. One more question each. Richard, in fragmented conflicts like this, and what usually comes first? Security arrangements, political concessions, justice mechanisms, if any peace is to last?
Very good question. In my belief, the way that peace can be found is through pressure on the parties. And the other speaker mentioned that while Rwanda are the initiators of this crisis, the Congolese government also bears some responsibility for their very clumsy response, having recruited a lot of very violent and unaccountable militia to their cause. So there is some responsibility on both sides, although the initial responsibility is certainly Kigali's. So there's pressure on the parties. Then we need to get talks going, which go beyond the mudslinging that we see on social media and in speeches between Kigali and Kinshasa, because the only way peace has come in the past in the Great Lakes is when, away from the spotlight, the political leaders or their very close senior representatives have managed to hammer out a deal in the back rooms. The problem, I think, at the moment, and this has been the case for 4 years, is that those conversations simply aren't happening, and we have a polarization and invective being thrown from one side to the other. So mediators working on this still have a huge amount of work to do.
And Kambale, if nothing meaningful changes in the next few weeks and months, what do you fear most? A Rwanda-Burundi confrontation, deeper Congolese fragmentation, the slow normalization of a regional war which no one can control?
And that is the fear that for Congolese, particularly those who are in the South Kivu province and Tanganyika province. Now, there is a fear that the M23 will continue its advance, and every time they are advancing, civilians are the one paying the price. I mean, for Congolese, including myself and many Congolese, be it in the diaspora inside, after 29 years of war, what we want is really peace. And we know that as we speak about peace, it's not there some type of cliché word that we said we want peace, right? And we also know that peace cannot come without justice. So as we continue to think about all mechanisms to bring about peace, if we don't include an element of justice for Congo, we will not have peace. Peace will be very elusive for the Congolese people. So this is the cry for the Congolese people today. After 29 years of war, we need to put all mechanisms available to create an international tribunal for Congo to send a signal to perpetrators of violence, to all for all the war crimes and crimes against humanity and possible genocide, proven a company quote, that has taken place in Congo, that is going to now stop. So that's the call for the Congolese civil society. We need an international tribunal for Congo to be able to stop this culture of impunity that has been reigning in the region for over 30 years.
Gentlemen, there we must end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Kambale Musavuli and Richard Moncrieff. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Bye for now.